This is the Graceful Atheist Podcast, a part of the Atheist United Studios Podcast Network. Welcome to the Graceful Atheist Podcast. My name is David, and I am trying to be the Graceful Atheist. Please consider rating and reviewing the podcast on the Apple Podcast Store, rate the podcast on Spotify, and subscribe to the podcast wherever you are listening. We have our merchandise store on TeePublic, where you can get your Graceful Atheist and Secular Grace themed items. The link will be in the show notes. If you're in the middle of doubt, deconstruction, the dark night of the soul, you do not have to do it alone. Join our private Facebook group, Deconversion Anonymous, and become a part of the community. You can find us at facebook.com/groups/deconversion. Special thanks to Mike T for editing today's show. On to today's show. Arlene interviews today's guest, Beth. Beth grew up during the time of the moral majority. She was a PK. She went through a quote-unquote rebellious period during her youth, but came back to the church to try to do everything right. It wasn't until decades later that she was able to deconstruct her faith and experience the freedom on the other side. Here is Arlene interviewing Beth.
Beth, welcome to the Graceful Atheist Podcast.
Thank you very much. I'm really happy to be here.
Yes, I'm excited to hear your story. You and I've chatted a little bit through the Deconversion Anonymous Facebook group. And I'm glad to get to hear your whole story. So we usually begin, just tell us about the religious environment that you grew up in.
Okay. Well, I was born into a pastor's home, an independent fundamental Baptist pastor's home.
Oh, wow.
And so it's all I ever really knew. And I'm the third of four children. I'm very extroverted, came to the planet very curious, asking lots and lots of questions. I was born in a small town in Central Florida, but in 1959, my dad took a pastoral calling to an independent Baptist church in the Atlanta area.
Oh, okay.
So he was the pastor of that church, if you can believe it, in this day and age, for 44 years.
Wow.
It relocated 3 different times in the Atlanta area, but it was always in that area. So the landscape of my childhood was just centered on the church and our version of Christianity. My dad networked with other independent Baptist pastors in the Atlanta area in the 1960s. Most of those people were Bob Jones University graduates.
Mm-hmm.
And quite frankly, anyone who had any connection to BJU was just considered auto-approved. That was just the gold standard for
Wow.
fundamental Baptists at that time. And so he basically took his cues on the way we should all be living our lives, on the sermons he preached, from Bob Jones University, from Jerry Falwell, who kind of came to prominence in the 70s. And, he eventually started the moral majority. And then James Dobson came out with his, parenting book, Strong-Willed Child, which I was considered to be. And I'm sure my parents were not wrong about that. Just to be honest. But in his preaching, the sermons were a lot about protecting your families from the shifting culture and, kind of railing about things in politics. And there were a lot of sermons on hell, the evils of rock and roll, communism and the Red Scare, teaching about end times, lots of scary sermons from the book of Revelation.
Mm-hmm.
And we were taught that the second coming of Christ would be at any moment. So the most important thing that you could do was to speak to every single person you encountered, whether they were a total stranger or not, and say to them, if you died tonight, do you know if you would go to heaven? And if not, I'll tell you how you can be sure of that. And that was the way people in my church were taught to be. And even though I was extroverted and loved people, I always felt embarrassed to do that. It felt really intrusive to me. It was difficult for me to get on board with that. And, I questioned everything, and it really was not appreciated. I was in public schools up through the 7th grade before our parents started putting us in private Christian schools. So in our home and in our church, there were very strict rules around our behavior, the way we could talk, the way we could dress, the media we could consume. And we were never really taught any type of boundaries or self-awareness other than the fact that be aware you're very sinful. That, that's what the self-awareness was all focused on. So I was saved and baptized by the age of 5. So I guess I had a really long list of sins by then.
Oh, wow. I know, right? Like little children have no concept of, oh my heavens.
Yeah. Yeah. Like talking back to your mother and having to get a spanking. Those were the deep sins from those times. And that independent Baptist church movement was really growing in the Southeast at the time. And that was also during the rise of the civil rights movement, the women's movement, the anti-war movements. And so because of all those things being in the news, we did as a church and a family a lot of othering of people who just weren't like us. And the whole tone of that really lacked compassion and, just about for anyone who was different than us. And for me, I was just fascinated by other people who weren't like us. So like occasionally in elementary school, if I got to go to a friend's home or go to a sleepover or something like that with a family that wasn't like ours, I was just fascinated and loved to see that, oh, they don't go to church, but wow, they're the nicest, sweetest people. And that was just very curious to me. I thought that's very, very interesting. And then when I got into the 70s and I became a teenager, all of those strict rules were harder and harder to deal with.
Yes, I imagine they were.
And my dad was so big on trying to keep us from watching the wrong things on TV that back then, when my mother would go get the weekly groceries, she would buy that little TV guide magazine. And it would tell you a little synopsis of all the shows that were going to be on the major networks for the next week. And she would hand it to him when she got home from the grocery store. He would take out a ballpoint pen, sit down, flip through it, read every synopsis, and write the word no very large across it. And that's how we knew when we turned on the TV and we picked up the TV guide, what we could and mostly could not watch.
I was going to say he picks no instead of like, here are the things you can watch. It's here are the things you cannot watch. Yeah. Wow.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. It was definitely all about that. That's for sure. And also too, there was this pressure that because we were the preacher's children, that we were being watched by everyone in the church. And, when you're an adolescent, that is just the worst. Feeling, you must be a good testimony. You can't embarrass your dad. You can't embarrass the church. Somewhere along the way in there, Bill Gothard,
yes.
He came to the fore, and his first conferences in those early 70s, it wasn't called IBLP yet. It was called the Institute in Basic Youth Conflicts. That's what it started as. And he came to Atlanta, and he did these big conferences, I think down at the Civic Center, if I recall correctly. So there were lots and lots of conservative churches in the area that came to hear him speak. And I was made to go to 2 of those conferences as a teenager. And the main thing I remember was all that emphasis on the authority structure of the umbrella protection.
Oh, yes.
And yeah, that's covered in Shiny Happy People on Amazon Prime about the IBLP cult. So everything about that was authoritarian. It was misogynistic. And it just reiterated like the conditioning I had from birth that as a female, because I was female, it was just my place to submit and stay in my place. And then I would be safe and all would be well in my world. So I was never prepared for anything else. As a female, my sister and I were not taught how to manage finances. We were not taught to be ambitious about anything, hopes and dreams, because that was already laid out for us in the Bible as to what our place was going to be. We were told that if we did go to college, the only purpose would be to find a husband, and you didn't even have to worry about graduating. It was just all about finding someone to marry, because it's that person's job to take care of you.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
That you don't really need your own agency. That's just a bridge too far.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So basically I did what a lot of teenagers do in oppressive situations. I just lived a double life. I sang in the choir on Sundays and taught children's church, but I was sneaking out of my parents' house in the middle of the night to be with my friends. I was looking for all kinds of ways to get around the rules. I basically took the list of things they told me I could not do, and I just made it my to-do list.
Yeah.
And I basically checked off every box before I was 18.
All right, there you go.
Hey, they put it on a list.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's the thing. That's the whole thing with like the forbidden fruit. When you literally say, "Here is a tree that I'm going to sit in the middle of a garden," and then tell you not to eat that tree. That's like parenting 101. You don't do that. Yeah,
that's right. That's right. So as a result of that, when I was 17 and in between my junior and senior years of high school, I got kicked out of my Christian high school.
Oh, wow. I'm impressed.
Along with two boys that I had actually run away with to Colorado one summer.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. While my parents were ironically at a youth ministry, preaching to teenagers.
Oh, wow.
Yes. Yes. And yes, it did get their attention.
I imagine it did. Yeah.
And when we were found and I was retrieved, wasn't 18 yet. And because I messed up my senior year of high school, I basically was told that, they had to watch me all the time. I had to finish my senior year of high school through, back then, there was no online thing. Yeah. So you had to do that through through the snail mail correspondence school, take your classes. So I did that. So I finished my senior year in 3 months in the fall of 1973. So my parents told me that because I was going to graduate by Christmas time, that I had to go to a Christian college in January of 74. And they first said, our first choice for you is Bob Jones. And I busted out laughing and said, I won't last 3 days. And they knew it. They knew that. And then my dad found out about this very small, independent, Bible-believing college in Florida that a pastor friend of his was on the board of. Mm-hmm. And he asked me if I would be willing to go there. And I said yes, because I was just in anywhere but here mode.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's what I did. And honestly, it was just so good to be away from all of that drama and scandal that I had caused. And so, I really did enjoy my time in college. I really did.
Good.
Yeah, I did enjoy that. I did actually graduate, but I also did meet my first husband there. And yeah, he kind of like you, he didn't grow up as a Christian, mm-hmm. but he did come to faith when he was in college, living overseas. And so that's why he came to a Christian college. So we ended up getting married and starting our family. We had 3 children born very close together in the early 80s. So they were super busy years. And my husband was actually working at our alma mater at that Christian college while he was getting advanced degrees, a master's and a PhD. And because I was running a household and had 3 little kids, I just did part-time jobs as I could.
Mm-hmm.
And I shuttled them around and ran the home, and we were very active in the church. And you know how you want your kids in the programs, and
Yes. Yep.
so that becomes your social life. It becomes your whole life. And so we did that. Where he worked, they did not pay well at all, so we really struggled financially, and it was just a constant source of stress. And I was always praying, and doubling down on all of that, that, oh, I knew God would take care of us and all of that, but it was just so hard. And as he added to his education, you should make more money
Yeah.
based on that, right? And it just was not happening to the level that it would have, outside of it being a small ministry. And, as our children got a little older, in our marriage, we started having conflicts over our parenting styles, and his work environment at that Christian college, which it no longer exists. The school went out of business several years ago. The leadership had changed over, and a couple of, I call them Bob Jones dudes, were running it. And, there was some, just the way that they were just harsh. They were harsh.
Yeah.
And they didn't seem to care that much about how little all of these people with young families were getting paid. And, but that was somehow supposed to be spiritual, because this was God's work, and all your rewards will be in another life.
There you go. Yeah. They don't have to pay you a whole lot, because this isn't what this is about. This is about serving the kingdom. And
Yep, that's exactly what it was like. And so, I just kept thinking, well, we're doing this for God. And, so it's almost like a magical thinking is going on after a while in your brain, that you think that prayer and just, oh, maybe I just need to go to another Bible study, read another book.
Yeah.
All of that.
I mean, what other options? They don't give you any other options. It's just get in the word, pray, be in community. Get in the word, pray, and be in community. They don't give you anything else. Fasting, maybe sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's just the way it was. And then when the early 2000s rolled around, he left his job there, and he got a very well-deserved position in a secular college.
Oh, good.
And I was so glad to see that. And with our kids, who were now all living away at college, I thought we might be able to reset our relationship, just have a different time. But that was not going to be, which was such a shock to me.
Oh, no.
And I was absolutely stunned, by the fact that he told me that he just didn't want to be married anymore.
I'm so sorry.
At a time when, and so it was just really shocking. And, the fight, flight, freeze, fawn reactions to trauma, I'm a freezer.
Yeah.
And I just am when it comes to trauma. And, I was just stunned, because I didn't know how I was going to live my life. Because, I thought there was this story that I could see the end of.
Yep.
Of how things were going to go. Now, he did agree to go with me to a Christian therapist. Honestly, I think that therapist let us go to therapy too long. Like, I think he probably could tell in the first few sessions that there was no way we were staying together.
Yeah.
But part of it too was me digging in. I just would not accept the D word, it wouldn't go inside my brain. And there was, in the Christian circles we were in, that was a huge shame to go through a divorce. I mean, that was considered a big deal. So anyway, unanswered prayers again, right? So these were the cognitive dissonances, right, that were happening along the way. And probably the biggest thing about me for the divorce at the time, because of the circles we were in, I just felt like a failure, and I felt like a cliche. The midlife crisis happened.
Ah, I see. Yeah.
Right. Because I was around 48 at that time, or I should say we were. We did divorce, and I found myself on my own with something I'd never thought would happen to me.
Yeah.
And, I was just grieving. I was facing, oh, it's up to me what I do next. Oh, wait a minute, God, God, I'm sure God's got to be in there with me, and we're going to do this together, And so I stayed in church, I mean, I had doubts about all of this, but it was just all inside of me, that I was holding inside. And we had been a really visible family in our church. There was a church of about 1,500 people.
Oh,
and I
wow.
thought I had 1,500 friends, But basically, what I found out was that I had maybe 5 left from that church. It was so weird to come to that realization.
I bet.
That,
That's hard.
that if everything's going great,
Yes.
you're in the in crowd,
Mm-hmm.
right? That is definitely the way it felt to me. So I started looking for another church, and I found this little Presbyterian Church USA in our town. And I slept in there one Sunday on the back row, and the service was a progressive church, which I wasn't used to, but the whole service was so refreshing. And I thought to myself, oh, I'll never be in leadership in church again because I've got the big D up on my shoulder, But as I kept going and meeting people, I found out that the current interim pastor had been divorced. And I'm like, say what?
Oh, wow. Yeah. Rebels.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I was just, and then women were behind the pulpit too,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
participating. And it was such a shock to my system. And I was like, wow, this is incredible. So as I got to know people and they found out my background, they were like, you should be tapped to be an elder. And the short story is they really kind of put me up on spiritual crutches.
Mm-hmm.
Really lovely people. And they did, affirm my gifts. And I decided to become an elder in the Presbyterian Church USA. And I did that. And it just felt good to me. All of that was good to me. And, nobody there saw me as damaged,
Yeah.
the way that I had felt. They were wonderful. And I wished I had stayed there. But what happened was some college friends of mine told me that a new church had started in the area. It was with a PCA pastor. So the Presbyterian Church in America is a much more conservative. They're a break off from the PCA.
Yeah, we were part of that, and we learned, because we were PCA, you had to learn how the bad PCUSA people had gone rogue and believed all this crazy stuff, but we were the true church and the conservative. Oh yeah, so I'm familiar with a little bit of that.
Yeah. So that's really, really, it was interesting. And I really was taken with the new young pastor of that church. I got really involved, and I actually ended up leaving my PCUSA church to go be a part of that little church. So that was kind of interesting. But I did meet lovely people there. It was an interesting experience, but I think it kind of held me back from broadening my horizons because I made that decision. Over time, after I helped my youngest child, who had graduated from college, to move to San Francisco to start her career, when I came home from that trip, I was just feeling very alone, in spite of the fact that I was working and I had my church friends, and then kind of a perfect storm started to form that I completely misread. So basically what happened was an old friend from my Christian high school contacted me and said, oh, do you remember this mutual friend of ours from high school? Well, he's also divorced. Would you like me to connect, you two?
Mm-hmm.
And the short story is, I said, yes, sure. Why not? So I started talking to that guy and emailing and then talking on the phone. And then he came to see me and we started dating, and our relationship moved very, very quickly. And we seemed very, very compatible. And instead of doing my due diligence about him, I really rushed into it because I'm thinking, God's answered my prayers.
Yeah.
He's opened this door, and it's my turn for happiness. And of course, now I know that's just, all those chemicals in you, that high you get from a new love relationship.
New relationship energy. Yep.
Exactly. That's exactly what it was on my part. But I kept thinking, like he seemed to be so compatible spiritually. We were praying together. We were reading scripture together. Because we had known each other when we were younger, we remembered each other's families. He didn't
Okay.
seem to be a stranger. It was that kind of situation. And so I married him with, after not a lot of time, just a few months. And for 6 years, I was with someone who actually had very serious mental health issues.
Oh, no.
And they presented very gradually. And so there were like lows, and then highs, and then lows, and then highs. And so I thought the highs were from my prayers. Those were my answered prayers.
Yep.
When things would get better along the way. And, he had a lot of things he had been hiding from me about his past. And so I would get information in a slow drip. Sometimes it was things that would come in the mail to him or some phone call he got where he kind of had to tell me stuff. And it took a while to figure it out, but I discovered he had a criminal past for domestic violence.
Oh,
and it was just such a shock. And so I felt very embarrassed. I felt stupid. I felt ashamed, that I'd gone into this marriage, that I had rushed in. And then I'm thinking, oh, wait a minute, God, this was supposed to be a God thing.
Mm-hmm.
What's going on here? And so I did what I usually do when I feel traumatized. I kind of froze. I kind of felt paralyzed. And I just doubled down on my prayer. Like I thought that would be a shield that was, going to protect me, from it. And, it ended after a very threatening encounter with him where for my own safety, I had to sneak out and stay with some friends. But while I did that, a couple of days later, he died in our home by suicide.
Oh, gosh.
Yeah. So you talk about wondering where God was.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, like all the praying and the waiting and the wondering, and then a traumatic event like that happening, and it's all the questions. You have all the questions.
Yeah. And then, of course, I stayed in freeze because that was a whole new level. It was such a shock. It was so awful to deal with. It happened in the home we shared. Thankfully, I was with friends, so I wasn't the person who actually discovered, him.
Mm-hmm.
It was my friend who told me to go outside when he discovered him. And so it was really, really tough. And, I did get to have some therapy sessions after that about grief and so forth, but I mainly just did what I usually do and just kept going, working. I'm very task oriented, just trying to get my bearings again in life after going through all of that. And just also was questioning myself, like, how in the world did I get here? How did I get in this situation?
Yeah.
It was really rough. And then I started having strange physical symptoms of almost feeling paralyzed. It actually landed me in an ER when I got to where I could hardly stand. And basically it was my body holding trauma.
Yeah.
Unprocessed trauma.
Yes.
And thankfully the emergency room I went to, it didn't take that long for the doctors and nurses to figure that out, that's what was going on with me.
Oh, wow.
So a real beginning of healing came for me when I stopped attending church entirely. And I realized, Sundays are wonderful.
Right.
I had spent literally my entire life never having just a Sunday for how I wanted to spend it. And so I just got back into my body is what I did. I rested a lot. I went to yoga all the more.
Nice.
I started meditating. I started to then not feel as lonely because I was like, oh, I'm here for me.
Aww.
I started to enjoy my own company.
Yes.
And I realized that the relationship that I had neglected my entire life was the one with me.
Because you're taught from the time that you're little that, especially as a female, you need a man to take care of you and do this for you and do that for you. And And there's no relationship with yourself. I haven't thought of it that way, but yeah, exactly. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm actually a person with her own thoughts, needs, wants, all of that. And I just started feeling more alive with that realization and realizing that I had my own inner wisdom, that I'd always been intuitive.
Mm-hmm.
And, that's why I kind of identify as spiritual, because I've always gotten vibes about other people, but I wasn't that great with knowing what my own vibes were. Yeah, which was kind of interesting, but I was just grateful to be alive and to be able to feel safe again. And so I just embraced the personal agency over my life and felt so free. So I prioritized the relationship with me, and I have vowed to never abandon her again. Yeah, and it's been amazing. And I've also had to learn how to set boundaries, because I cannot make that vow to myself if I don't set boundaries. So I realized I had a dream I had filed away in my brain that someday I wanted to move to Northern California and live near my daughter and her family. And so I realized, why not?
Yeah.
So I relocated here 6.5 years ago, and I absolutely love it. I've never looked back. I've never regretted it. I'm far away from all the rest of my family who all live in the East, but this is a place I belong. And I think about it every day. There's so much natural beauty. I love hiking. I love walking. There's such diversity out here among people from all over the world. And it's so fun to hear people's stories and build relationships. It's just really an incredible joy. So I'm grateful for my 3 great kids and my grandchildren. I also have a really good relationship with my first husband.
Oh, good.
So I don't like to call him my ex. I actually refer to him as my husband. And, he and I are really good friends. I mean, we have a lot of history, right?
Yeah.
That goes back to our 20s, and we share children and grandchildren. So I'm very grateful that, in that sense, we are still a family. It took a lot of doing to get there in my heart, but I got there, and it's been a good thing for our whole family. And then the online communities have been great, between podcasts and I'm not a person who posts a lot online, but I'm more stalky on Facebook, even in our deconversion group. Mm-hmm. I do more reading than responding. And I love that. I love that opportunity to do that. And so I would say my deconstruction could be described as death by 1,000 cuts. Mm-hmm. Over time, it became very clear to me that, very little in life can be reduced to the binary of any kind.
Right. That's so
good
true.
or bad, mm-hmm. right or wrong. Instead, everything is nuanced and complex, right?
Yes.
So curiosity and ambiguity and just observing, and letting things be what they are. It's a much more peaceful way to live. Mm-hmm. And so I'm much less anxious than I used to be, and just more open. And the stories of other people endlessly fascinate me, which is why I absolutely love podcasts like Gap, yes. for sure. So I get, I don't like labels, but I guess I am an SBNR, spiritual but not religious. Uh-huh. Yeah, I don't attend church, although I work for one. I work for a very progressive PCUSA church on support staff. And I actually love what they do in social justice and the communities out here. They're great, very, very inclusive in every way. It's just a joy to watch that. I have very supportive and loving relationships with some of my nieces and nephews who have deconverted. And I treasure our conversations because I can have different conversations with them than they can have with other family members.
Yes, that makes sense. Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. And so my siblings are all still, practicing Christianity. Mm-hmm. And so it's just not a topic any of us ever talks about with one another. Although I'm sure they all talk about me because I've always been the one in the family who thought otherwise. So Like when Sharon announced at the age of 60 she was moving to California, I'm sure they all rolled their eyes and said, and who else would do that in our family?
I
So
love
I'm
it.
just staying on brand.
There you go. I love it. I love it.
Yeah, so I do want to say that I can't help realizing that over the past few years, it's become super obvious to me that those that are bent on destroying our democracy and forcing Christian beliefs on all people are actually a product of the
Mm.
past two generations of evangelicals, especially those of the fundamentalist type.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And as I've seen that happening and unfolding, I didn't see that one coming. I really didn't. Because, back then it seemed fringe and now it's moved into the mainstream. And so I just thought I would say that because it's quite startling to me that that is happening right now. And that it's related to how I was raised.
Yeah.
Right.
Because before the internet,
Yeah.
well, I grew up a generation below you, and it's like I didn't grow up in the church, so I didn't see all of that. Now, I did still see because I grew up in the South of the United States. I saw the just cultural version of, patriarchy, white supremacy, all those kinds of things. Like it was just part of our culture.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, seeing now like the House of Representatives, like just different people that have so much power that a long time ago, I would have thought, okay, these people are just crazy people that go to my parents or my cousin's church, my parents' church. And now it's like, no, these are their children, or these are those same people, and they have power and money, and in very, very, they can harm entire groups of people. And it's scary. And like you said, it's a product of those generations, many generations.
It is. Yeah. I mean, they found out that if they played the long game, it was going to pay off someday. And this is what's happened. It was them playing the long game and hanging in there and digging in and indoctrinating their children, and the next generation indoctrinating their children. I wanted to mention a couple of quotes that I really love. One of them is from the late David Bowie. Religion is for people who fear hell. Spirituality is for people who've already been there.
Oh, that's interesting. I like that. I have mixed emotions about the word spirituality, but I can see what he's saying. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I find it, I mean, that was very resonant for me. It was something I had read online and I went, wow. And then I know that you and I both, I know you love Mary Oliver.
Yes.
As do I. And of course, I do love the question, what will you do with your one wild and precious life? Because this is it. This is all we get.
Yeah.
It's our shot.
Yeah.
And I believe that. And so I want to make the most of it.
Right. Yes. So
yeah.
So what does spirituality look like for you? Like, what does that look like for you?
For me, it looks like loving kindness.
Mm-hmm.
It looks like being open and listening to others and just sitting with holding space for people to hear their stories.
I love it. Yeah.
And I mean, I delved a little bit. I mean, I'm a little hippy dippy, Yeah. She's got white sage she burns sometimes and crystals that I just love looking at and holding in my hand.
Yeah.
I don't really think they have powers, but they are of the earth and we are of the earth. So who knows?
It's all we're all connected in some kind of, it doesn't have to be supernatural way, but like, I don't know I don't know science well enough to articulate things like that, but it's like, if bad things happen to the insects, us way up here thinking we're above all the rest of the animals will be affected. Like if stuff happens to the soil, if stuff happens, I mean, we're so much more connected than we realize. And you have scientists who make it sound very intellectual, and that's awesome. Please be intellectual. And then you have people that are called like woo woo, but it's like, I don't want to say they're saying the same things because they're not saying the same things. And at the same time, we're still all interconnected. And like, I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
I can't articulate it very well, but I understand what you're saying.
Yeah. we came from the earth and we're going back to it. Nobody's getting out of here alive.
Right.
That's just that. Yeah, that is just a fact. And so, I've obviously got more runway behind me than I have ahead of me. So I want to make the most of all that is ahead of me. And I'm just very grateful to be, where I am at this point on my journey. Yeah, it's been an interesting one. Yeah. So thank you so much.
Yes. Thank you for being willing to tell your story. I have a couple more questions. You mentioned hiking and walking and being out of nature. Any other things that just bring awe and wonder and those kinds of experiences for you?
Well, I absolutely love reading and I love documentaries,
Ooh, okay.
Yes, yes. It's really kind of a weird spectrum with me because for example, I can really get into true crime, but then I can switch over to stand-up comedy and enjoy
I
it
like it. I love it.
very, very much as well. And also too, it's all storytelling, right?
That's
I
a
mean,
good point.
yeah, we're storytelling, meaning making people. That's what humans are.
Yes, yes.
And so I do love that too. I really, I've always enjoyed music very, very much. That's what my degree was in years and years ago, back in the day. But yeah, I mean, I'm just really, well, I can tell you some authors I'm kind of taken by.
Well, I was going to ask, do you have recommendations, podcasts, books, music, anything that was valuable to you while you were deconstructing or, that you just want to share? I'm here for any recommendations.
Yeah. Well, some of the podcasts that I'm really into right now are We Can Do Hard Things, which is Glennon Doyle's
Yes.
with her wife, Abby, and her sister, Amanda. In fact, she had Nadia Boltz-Weber on today.
Oh, I haven't listened to that episode.
It's such a good episode. Such a good episode. And I love one called Indoctrination because it's by a psychologist named Rachel Bernstein. So she has most of her guests have been in cults of sorts, but she also has included a lot of evangelical Christians and stories. She even had Marlene Winnell from Leaving the Fold, on there. And Marlene's book was very helpful to me. Then there's one called Trust Me, which is also about being in cults. And the two hosts of that, one of them was raised in an evangelical group. And then there's one called A Little Bit Culty.
Yes. Is that Amanda Montell?
No, that's Sarah Edmonds and Nippy Russell, who were in Nexium.
Oh, okay.
They live in Atlanta.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And then Straight White American Jesus. They just do such a good job with that weekly roundup of connecting the dots back to evangelical Christianity with all the things happening in the world. I find that really interesting. So I love Glennon Doyle and Untamed in particular. I've read all her books.
Okay.
In fact, the first one I read was when she was still a Christian.
Oh, it's some love book. I feel like she had a book about love whenever she was still a Christian.
Well, she had one about marriage. Yeah, about marriage. And then that was just before her marriage fell apart.
That's right. I've only read Untamed. I have confession. I don't love memoirs. Like I like podcasts where someone's telling their story, but I don't want to read 500 pages of their story. But somehow I read Untamed and I loved it. I was like, oh, it spoke to me, I guess is the phrase people use. Yeah.
Oh, but it's so affirming for women.
Yes.
And, and so that really, that's kind of how I was born, was Untamed, I guess. And anything by Annie Lamott. Anne
Lamott, girl. Oh, she's just, I've read all of her books as well. And all things Anne Lamott. Go ahead.
Yeah. I reread her books. I've read every one as well. And I reread them. She's just incredible. And she lives like 30 minutes from where I live. I would love to see her someday. Oh, yeah. That's on my list.
Yeah, I know she still goes to church. Just show up at her church and be like, hey.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's true too. Yeah. And then Nadia Boltz-Weber, I love her. Now her book I think it was called Shame, about sex, is really good. Because she really wrote it for those raised in purity culture. And even though nobody called it purity culture when I was a teenager, it was still purity culture.
It was this,
There was a lot of taboo around sex. Yeah. outside of marriage, for sure. And then Jamie Lee Finch wrote a book called You Are Your Own.
Yeah.
And that was really a helpful book for me too. Super, super encouraging. And she used to have a podcast that I listened to. I don't think her podcast is still going on, but those were all things. I mean, there's a lot, but I did try to curate down a few to share.
No, thank you for sharing.
But I just appreciate so much, the format of this podcast and, the spirit that it is done in, because it's not about us and them.
Nope. It's just people's stories.
It's about stories.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. So that's the best. And I really, really love that. So I really appreciate the opportunity. I feel very honored. So thank you.
Oh, well, I am honored that one of the most beautiful things about doing podcasts like this is people honor you with their story. And so thank you for doing this. Thank you for being willing to tell your story. And I know people will relate to it, and you'll find affirmation in the Deconversion Anonymous Facebook group because people already know you and they'll be like, yay. So yeah, thank you so much, Beth, for telling your story.
Yeah, thank you, Arlene. I really appreciate it.
My final thoughts on the episode. I love hearing people's stories that span multiple decades. Like people it just shows no matter how long you've lived, what you've been convinced is true for however long, things can change. People can stay open to changing when there's new information. Beth tried for years and years and years to make the God thing work, and it didn't work. She did all the right things. She said all the right prayers. She participated in the right activities. She was super conservative. She was super liberal. And just all the cognitive dissonance, little thing after little thing, like she said, death by 1,000 cuts. Over time, you just realize it doesn't work. And she was willing to be okay with that and deal with whatever grief or sadness or loss of community that came out of that. And now she's in a place where she knows her own thoughts. She knows her own desires, hopes, dreams. She's living an embodied life. She has her Sundays free. There's just so much freedom, so much joy and happiness that she's been able to find without religion, without God. And her spirituality is good for her, and it's good for others. Loving kindness, interconnectedness, and holding space for people to exist without judgment, those are all good things. All good things. So Beth, thank you again for being on the podcast. I really appreciate your authenticity and your willingness to just tell so much of your story. I appreciate it.
The secular grace thought of the week is pluralism. Beth's story reminded me, and current headlines have reinforced how much we need pluralism. Contra what Mike Johnson, current Speaker of the House, says, the separation of church and state is both good for the church and good for the state. And whenever those two things begin to mix with one another, bad things happen. I grew up in the 80s and saw the moral majority begin to acquire political power. At the time, it seemed somewhat innocuous. Today, I have a completely different view. The Christian nationalism that is apparent within the politics of government is dangerous and needs to be called out. Pluralism is hard, though. Pluralism means we do accept other people's voices, but we run into the problem of the paradox of tolerance. The only thing we cannot tolerate is intolerance. Until next time, my name is David, and I'm trying to be the graceful atheist. Join me and be graceful human beings. The beat is called Waves by Mackay Beats. If you want to get in touch with me to be a guest on the show, email me at gracefulatheist@gmail.com. For blog posts, quotes, recommendations, and full episode transcripts, head over to gracefulatheist.com. This is the Graceful Atheist Podcast, a part of the Atheist United Studios podcast network.